The Archival Institute of Velshera was the most important place in the entire galaxy if you cared about old things. Every species that had ever discovered ancient ruins sent their best scientists here. The building itself was massive, with towers that stretched so high they disappeared into the clouds. Inside, thousands of researchers from hundreds of different worlds worked day and night, trying to understand the past. But there was one mystery that had stumped everyone for 300 years. It was a collection of stone tablets, covered in strange symbols and markings that nobody could read. These tablets had been found on 17 different planets, scattered across the galaxy. Some were discovered in collapsed buildings. Others were buried deep underground. A few had even been found floating in space, preserved in the wreckage of ancient ships. The scientists called the language Proto-Terminus, because they believed it came from some incredibly old civilization that existed before anyone else. They thought whoever wrote these tablets must have been the first intelligent species to ever travel between the stars. The predecessors, they called them, and they spoke about them with the kind of reverence usually reserved for gods. Dr. Kesseth was one of the lead researchers. She had 4 arms, which was normal for her species, and she'd been working on these tablets for most of her adult life. Her office was covered in papers, holographic projections, and half-empty cups of a bitter drink that helped her stay awake during long research sessions. She had a team of 23 scientists from 12 different species, all considered the brightest minds in xenolinguistics. Just last month, they'd achieved something incredible. After 87 years of combined effort, using the most advanced computer algorithms and linguistic analysis tools available, they had successfully translated one complete sentence. Just one. The celebration had lasted for 3 days. Academic papers were written. Awards were given out. The sentence itself was carved into a monument outside the institute. The sky remembers what the earth forgets. It was poetic. Mysterious. Everyone agreed it proved the predecessors were deeply philosophical beings with profound wisdom. Then the human showed up. His name was Tyler Brooks, and he was part of a cultural exchange program. Earth had only joined the galactic community about 40 years ago, and humans were still considered newcomers. Most species saw them as enthusiastic but ultimately insignificant. They didn't have the most advanced technology. Their ships were functional but clunky. They were friendly enough, but what could they really offer to civilizations that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years? Tyler was a linguistics professor from some university back on Earth. He'd been excited to visit the institute, sending messages ahead about how honored he felt to be included. Dr. Kesseth had agreed to give him a tour mostly out of politeness. It was good for interspecies relations, after all. On his first day, she walked him through the main archive hall. This was where they kept the most important tablets, displayed in protective cases with perfect lighting and environmental controls. Each one had a small plaque explaining where it had been found and how old it was. Some were over 50,000 years old. Tyler stopped in front of the first display case. He leaned in close, squinting at the symbols carved into the ancient stone. Dr. Kesseth started to explain how many scientists had examined this particular tablet, how many hours of analysis it had required, but Tyler wasn't listening. He was reading. Out loud. In a clear, steady voice, Tyler began reciting what was written on the tablet. He moved to the next case, then the next, reading each one like he was going through his morning news feed. He paused occasionally, tilting his head, and made comments like, "Oh, this one's got some grammatical quirks or interesting word choice here." Dr. Kesseth felt her 3 hearts start beating faster. Around them, other researchers had stopped working. They were staring. One of them dropped a data pad, and it clattered loudly on the marble floor. "What are you doing?" Dr. Kesseth finally managed to ask. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. Tyler looked up, surprised by the question. "I'm reading the tablets." "Isn't that why you brought me here?" "I figured you wanted a second opinion on the translations." "You can read these?" Another researcher, a tall insectoid scientist named Dr. Vrel, pushed forward. His translator box was crackling with interference from his agitation. "Well, yeah," Tyler said, looking confused by their reactions. "I mean, it's not modern language or anything. The grammar is pretty archaic, kind of formal. But it's basically ancient Latin with some Sumerian loan words mixed in. We studied this stuff back in graduate school. Latin was used to cross a huge empire on Earth about 2,000 years ago, and Sumerian is even older, maybe 5,000 years. This," he gestured at the tablets, "looks like what you'd get if someone who spoke both languages was trying to create a written standard." The silence in the hall was absolute. Somewhere in the building, an air circulation system hummed. Far away, someone's equipment beeped softly. But in the archive hall, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Dr. Kessether's mind was racing. Ancient Latin. Sumerian. Earth languages. These tablets were 50,000 years old. Humans had only been in space for 2 centuries. The math didn't work. It couldn't work. Unless the predecessors weren't some mysterious alien civilization at all. Unless the beings everyone had been studying with such reverence, the civilization that had apparently mastered space travel before anyone else, the culture that had left ruins on 17 different worlds. Unless they were human. The archive hall erupted into chaos. Scientists were shouting in a dozen different languages, their translators struggling to keep up. Dr. Kesseth felt dizzy, like the floor had suddenly tilted beneath her feet. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of mistake, maybe a prank, or perhaps the human was confused and seeing patterns that weren't actually there. Do it again, she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. Translate another tablet. One we haven't fully analyzed yet. Tyler shrugged and walked over to a tablet in the corner, one that had only recently been added to the collection. It had been discovered just 3 years ago on a distant moon, still partially encased in ice. The research team had barely begun working on it. He studied it for maybe 30 seconds, then started speaking. This one's a tax record. Looks like someone named Gaius Julius, that's a Roman name, by the way, owed grain payments for his land holdings. The amount is listed here in Roman numerals, though they're using a modified version that's honestly more efficient than the original. And down here at the bottom, there's a note from the tax collector complaining that Gaius is 3 months late on his payment. Dr. Vrel pulled up the preliminary analysis his team had done on that same tablet. After months of work, they'd identified it as possibly being administrative in nature. They'd found repeating symbols that might indicate numbers. They'd theorized it could be related to resource distribution. Tyler had gotten more information in 30 seconds than they'd managed in 3 years. Show me how you know this, Dr. Kesseth said, pulling Tyler toward her office. The human followed, looking increasingly nervous as dozens of alien scientists crowded behind them. For the next 6 hours, Tyler walked them through it. He pulled up educational databases from Earth, showing them how Latin evolved and spread during something called the Roman Empire. He demonstrated how Sumerian cuneiform worked, the wedge-shaped marks that formed one of humanity's earliest writing systems. He showed them how certain words in the tablets were clearly Latin, while others were Sumerian, and a few seemed to be a hybrid that mixed both linguistic structures. It's like finding an English document that randomly uses French words, Tyler explained. English borrowed tons of vocabulary from French after the Norman conquest in 1066. That doesn't make English a French language, but you can see the influence. Same thing here. This is primarily Latin-based, but whoever wrote it was also familiar with Sumerian and wasn't afraid to borrow terms when Latin didn't have the right word. A young researcher from a species that looked like walking crystals spoke up. But these tablets are over 50,000 years old. Your species has only been spacefaring for 200 years. The timeline makes no sense. Tyler nodded slowly. Yeah, I've been thinking about that. And honestly, I don't have a good answer. Either your dating methods are wrong, which seems unlikely since you've been using them successfully for thousands of years, or... He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Or humans have been to space before, Dr. Kesseth finished the thought. Somehow, your species reached the stars tens of thousands of years ago, built a civilization that spanned multiple worlds, and then lost everything. You fell so far that you forgot you'd ever left your planet. You had to reinvent everything from scratch. The room fell silent again. The implications were staggering. It meant that somewhere in humanity's past, there had been a catastrophic collapse. Not just a setback or a dark age, but a complete civilizational reset. Whatever had caused it had been so devastating that it erased almost all evidence of what came before. Humanity had gone from traveling between the stars to living in caves, hunting with stone tools, and slowly, painfully, climbing back up to civilization over tens of thousands of years. Dr. Vrel was frantically typing on his datapad. If this is true, if humans were the predecessors, then we need to understand what happened to them. Every species in this galaxy looks at predecessor technology with awe. We assume they were more advanced than us, wiser than us. But if they're human, it means they fell. And if they could fall, then any of us could fall. The director of the institute, an elderly being whose species lived for centuries, called an emergency meeting. Within hours, representatives from every major galactic government were in video conferences, demanding answers. The Council of Archival Sciences convened for only the 3rd time in its 5,000-year history. Tyler found himself at the center of a political firestorm. Some species were fascinated, eager to learn more about this forgotten human history. Others were frightened, seeing humans as a cautionary tale of how even the mightiest civilizations could crumble. A few were angry, feeling somehow deceived, as if humans had been hiding this information intentionally. "We didn't know," Tyler said during one particularly heated conference call. "I've studied ancient languages my entire life, and I never imagined they'd be useful off Earth. We thought Latin and Sumerian died out thousands of years ago, replaced by newer languages. We preserved them for historical interest, the same way you might preserve any cultural artifact. We had no idea our ancestors had written these same languages on worlds dozens of light years away." Dr. Keseth stood beside him, her forearms crossed in a gesture her species used when making serious pronouncements. "The question now is what we do with this information. These tablets aren't just historical curiosities anymore. They're messages from an ancient human civilization to their descendants. And I suspect those messages contain warnings we need to understand." Someone in the conference asked the question everyone was thinking. What could possibly destroy a spacefaring civilization so completely that they forgot they'd ever left their homeworld? Tyler looked at the tablet spread across the table, at the words carved in stone by people who shared his DNA, who'd spoken languages he'd studied in university. People who'd somehow lost everything. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I think we need to find out. Because if it happened once, there's no guarantee it couldn't happen again." 3 weeks later, Tyler found himself on a transport ship heading toward Kepler 442b, a planet that orbited a star over 1,000 light-years from Earth. He'd packed for a week-long trip, thinking this would be a quick consultation. Instead, he was now part of the most important archaeological expedition in galactic history. The ship was crowded. Dr. Keseth had assembled representatives from 12 different species, each bringing their own expertise. There were geologists, engineers, computer specialists, and historians. Everyone wanted to be part of uncovering the truth about the predecessors. About humanity's forgotten past. Kepler 442b had been one of the first planets where predecessor ruins were discovered, almost 200 years ago. The planet itself was beautiful, with purple-tinged vegetation and vast oceans that sparkled under an orange sun. The ruins sat on a plateau overlooking one of those oceans, a massive complex of buildings that covered almost 50 square kilometers. For decades, researchers had studied these ruins with careful precision. They'd mapped every building, documented every artifact, and developed elaborate theories about what the complex had been used for. The prevailing theory, published in hundreds of academic papers, was that it had been some kind of governmental palace or religious temple. The layout suggested ceremonial purposes. The central buildings were clearly important. Everything pointed toward this being a place of power and reverence. Tyler stepped off the transport and immediately felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Somewhere, thousands of generations ago, humans had walked on this soil. They'd built these structures, lived their lives, and then vanished. Dr. Keseth guided the group toward the main complex. Protective barriers had been erected around the most important sections, and researchers had set up a base camp nearby. As they walked, she explained the various theories about each building's purpose. Tyler listened politely for about 10 minutes. Then he stopped in front of a large building near the entrance to the complex. There was a stone marker beside the doorway, covered in the now familiar symbols. He read it aloud without thinking. Admissions Office. New students report here for orientation and dormitory assignments. The entire expedition came to a halt. Dr. Keseth's translator box made a sound like a choke. "What did you just say?" "It's an admissions office," Tyler repeated, pointing at the marker. "This isn't a temple. It's a university. A school. This whole complex, it's a campus." For the next several hours, Tyler walked through the ruins reading signs that had baffled researchers for generations. A building they'd thought was a ceremonial hall was actually the Department of Quantum Mechanics. Another, with elaborate decorations that suggested religious significance, turned out to be student housing, Building 7, and the decorations were just graffiti left by bored students tens of thousands of years ago. The central structure, the one everyone had been certain was the most important religious or governmental building, had a large inscription over its main entrance. Previous researchers had spent decades trying to decipher it, certain it must be some profound philosophical statement. Tyler read it and laughed, though the sound came out bitter. Harold P. Morrison Memorial Library. Established 52,340 BCE. In pursuit of knowledge and truth. They entered the library carefully. The interior had been partially excavated, revealing massive halls with empty shelves and scattered debris. But in the center of the main room, protected by some kind of energy field that still functioned after 50,000 years, was a collection of crystalline storage devices. Researchers had been studying these crystals for years, trying to understand how they worked. The technology was far beyond anything current galactic civilization had achieved. Tyler approached one of the interfaces, a panel of symbols and geometric shapes that had resisted all attempts at activation. He studied it for a moment, then tentatively pressed a sequence of buttons. Nothing happened. He tried again, this time using a different pattern. The system came to life with a soft humming sound. Holographic displays appeared in the air, showing strings of symbols and numbers. Tyler felt his heart racing. He was looking at a computer interface from 50,000 years ago, and it was using principles he recognized. Binary code, base 60 mathematics derived from Sumerian counting systems, file structures that resembled ancient Earth computer designs. "Can you read this?" Dr. Vrel asked, his voice hushed. "Some of it," Tyler admitted. "It's like finding a really old computer from the 1980s. I understand the basic logic, but the specific programs are unfamiliar. Give me some time to figure out the navigation system." He worked for 3 hours, with Dr. Kessether's team providing support and taking notes on everything he did. Slowly, he began to understand the file structure. There were thousands of documents stored in the crystals, maybe millions. Academic papers, student records, administrative files. An entire university's worth of information, preserved perfectly. Tyler managed to open a file at random. It was a doctoral dissertation, complete with the student's name, advisor, and defense date. The title made his hands shake: Optimization of Alcubierre Drive Efficiency in High-Gravity Wells. The date stamp, when converted to Earth's calendar, put it at approximately 52,000 years ago. Dr. Kesseth read over his shoulder, her translator parsing the document. "This is about faster-than-light travel. They are discussing modifications to the standard drive systems to improve performance near massive stellar objects." "This isn't theoretical," Tyler said quietly. "Look at the methodology section. They are discussing experimental results. They actually built these drives. They tested them. This is practical engineering, not just mathematical speculation." More files were opened. Course syllabi for classes on stellar cartography. Research papers on exotic matter manipulation. A student newspaper complaining about the quality of cafeteria food. The mundane mixed with the extraordinary, painting a picture of a thriving academic community that studied technologies the current galaxy was still struggling to understand. Then Tyler found the emergency broadcasts. They were stored in a separate section, marked with warning symbols. The files were dated to a period spanning about 50 years, all clustered near the end of the university's operation. His translation software struggled with the urgent, frantic language, but the message was clear enough. Evacuation orders. Emergency protocols. References to something called the Cascade, and repeated mentions of stellar navigation failures. The files showed an organization trying desperately to maintain order as something catastrophic unfolded. The final file was different. It wasn't an official document or academic paper. It was a personal message, handwritten and scanned into the system. The handwriting was shaky, suggesting it had been written in a hurry or under extreme stress. Tyler's voice cracked as he read it aloud. "To anyone who finds this, we tried to reach Earth. We tried to go home. The navigation systems failed. The drive stopped working. We don't understand why. We're stranded here, and we know help isn't coming. Our children will survive, we'll make sure of that, but they won't remember what we were. We're sorry. Tell Earth we tried. Tell them we're sorry." The library fell silent except for the soft humming of the ancient computer system. Outside, the orange sun was setting over the alien ocean. And Tyler stood there, reading the desperate last words of people who'd shared his language, his culture, and his DNA, people who'd died thousands of generations ago still hoping for rescue that never came. Tyler couldn't sleep that night. While the rest of the expedition team rested in their temporary shelters, he sat in the library, bathed in the blue glow of the ancient computer system, searching through files. The interface was becoming easier to navigate the more he used it. It was like learning to ride an old bicycle, awkward at first, but the basic mechanics were familiar enough. He found himself drawn to the academic papers. There were thousands of them, covering every scientific discipline imaginable. Physics, biology, engineering, mathematics. Some of the concepts were so advanced that Tyler could barely grasp them even with his translation software. These people hadn't just been spacefaring. They'd been masters of sciences the current galaxy was still working to understand. But one category of papers kept appearing in his searches, flagged with red warning symbols. They all dealt with something called exotic particle accumulation, and its relationship to faster-than-light travel. The earliest paper he found was dated about 200 years before the evacuation orders. It was published in something called the Journal of Applied Quantum Mechanics, and the author was warning about a theoretical problem. When ships traveled faster than light, they left behind trace amounts of exotic particles. Individually, these particles were harmless and decayed quickly. But the paper suggested that if enough ships traveled the same routes over and over, the particles could accumulate, building up in the fabric of space itself. Tyler read through the calculations, struggling with the advanced mathematics. The author was predicting that this accumulation could lead to what they called localized spacetime fragmentation. In simpler terms, if too many particles built up in one area, the very structure of space could become unstable. He found more papers, published over the following decades. Each one refined the theory, adding experimental data and more sophisticated models. The warnings became more urgent. One paper demonstrated that the effect wasn't just theoretical, they detected particle buildup along major shipping routes. Another showed that the accumulation was happening faster than initially predicted. Dr. Kesseth found him at dawn, still reading. She'd brought him something that passed for coffee in her culture, though it tasted like burnt copper. "You've been here all night," she observed. "They knew," Tyler said without looking up. "The ancient humans, the predecessors, whatever you want to call them. They knew their technology was destroying space itself, and they documented everything." He pulled up a paper on the holographic display. This one was published just 30 years before the final evacuation. It was a peer-reviewed study that had appeared in multiple prestigious journals, co-authored by scientists from 17 different institutions. The title alone was damning: Critical Threshold Analysis, FTL Travel Sustainability and Predicted Cascade Failure. The paper laid out everything in painful detail. The exotic particles weren't just accumulating, they were reaching critical levels. The authors had identified specific regions of space where the buildup was most severe, mostly along heavily traveled trade routes and near major population centers. They'd created models predicting what would happen when the particle concentration reached a tipping point. The prediction was catastrophic. Once the threshold was crossed, the particles would trigger a chain reaction, a cascade effect that would spread through spacetime like cracks spreading through ice. In regions affected by the cascade, faster-than-light travel would become impossible. Not difficult. Not dangerous. Impossible. The underlying physics that allowed FTL drives to work would simply stop functioning. They published this in major journals, Tyler said, his voice hollow. This wasn't some fringe theory by a crazy scientist. This was mainstream, peer-reviewed, accepted science. They knew what was coming. Dr. Kesseth was reading the paper herself now, her forearms moving frantically across her own datapad as she cross-referenced the ancient formulas with current galactic science. Her face, usually so composed, had gone pale. "Tyler, these equations, they're describing the same FTL principles we use today. Everyone in the galaxy uses them. It's the only method we know that allows practical interstellar travel." "Keep reading," Tyler said quietly. The paper included recommendations. The authors suggested immediate reduction in FTL traffic, particularly along overused routes. They proposed alternative navigation paths that would distribute the particle accumulation more evenly. They even outlined research directions for entirely different FTL methods that wouldn't produce the same exotic particles. But there were also economic analyses showing the cost of implementing these recommendations. Reduced trade. Slower travel times. Colonies that would be harder to reach. The paper acknowledged that following their suggestions would mean significant economic hardship across the entire civilization. Tyler found the follow-up papers. There had been debates, conferences, political discussions. Some leaders had taken the warnings seriously. Others had dismissed them as alarmist. The scientific community was united in their concern, but they were overruled by economic and political interests. Trade couldn't be disrupted. Colonial expansion was too important. Surely they had more time. Surely they could find a solution before it became critical. They'd been wrong. Dr. Vrel arrived with the rest of the expedition's senior scientists. Tyler showed them everything he'd found. He pulled up the final scientific paper published before the cascade, written by the same group of authors who'd been warning everyone for decades. The tone was no longer academic. It was desperate. The threshold has been reached. Cascade initiation detected in sectors 7 through 23. All FTL-capable vessels should avoid these regions immediately. We estimate complete propagation across the affected zone within 90 to 120 days. There is no known method to reverse or halt the process. We were warned. We did not listen. May those who come after us learn from our failure. Dr. Keseth was working with her team's physicists, running the ancient human calculations through modern computers. The results came back quickly, and when the lead physicist spoke, his voice was shaking. The particle buildup is happening now. In our civilization. We're traveling the same routes the ancient humans used, building up the same exotic particles in the same regions of space. Based on these calculations and our current rate of FTL travel. He paused, checking his numbers again as if hoping they'd change. We have approximately 500 years before we reach critical threshold. Maybe less. The cascade will happen again. The shelter erupted into chaos. Scientists were shouting, some in denial, others demanding immediate verification. Dr. Keseth had to restore order by physically placing herself in the center of the room and demanding silence. Tyler kept reading through the files, looking for anything that might help. He found personal logs from scientists who'd watched their civilization collapse. They described ships stranded between stars when their drives failed. Colonies cut off from support and supply lines. A vast interstellar network fragmenting into isolated pockets of humanity, each one suddenly alone. The colonists on worlds like this one had tried to maintain their technology, their knowledge, their civilization. They'd carved warnings in stone, the tablets, hoping that someone, someday, would understand. But without the infrastructure of an interstellar society, without trade and communication and shared resources, their technology base had slowly eroded. Generations passed. Children grew up knowing less than their parents. Libraries were lost to disasters or simple neglect. Eventually, most colonies failed completely. The people scattered, reverting to simpler ways of life, trying just to survive. And over thousands of years, they forgot. They forgot the stars, forgot the ships, forgot that they'd ever been anything other than simple people living simple lives. Only Earth had survived the collapse, and only because it was the homeworld, with a large enough population and diverse enough ecosystem to sustain humanity through the Dark Ages. But even Earth had forgotten. The ancient Romans and Cimmerians who'd eventually risen from that collapse had no idea their ancestors had walked on distant worlds. Tyler found one final file, a personal video message recorded by one of the scientists just days before the library systems went into emergency preservation mode. The recording was corrupted, the image flickering and distorted, but the woman's face was clear enough. She looked exhausted, defeated. "We built so much," she said in Latin, her voice thick with emotion. "We reached so far. And we threw it all away because we were too greedy, too short-sighted to listen to our own scientists. If anyone ever finds this, please, learn from us. The universe is beautiful and vast, but it has rules. Break those rules and pay the price. We're paying it now. Don't make the same mistake." Tyler turned off the recording and looked at the assembled scientists, representatives of a dozen species, all of them suddenly confronting their own mortality. Not as individuals, but as civilizations. "We have 500 years, he said. "That's more warning than my ancestors had. The question is, what are we going to do with it?" The journey back to the Archival Institute felt different than the trip out. The transport ship was quiet, everyone lost in their own thoughts. Tyler spent most of the voyage in his quarters, organizing his findings and preparing for what he knew would be the most important presentation of his life. He wasn't just a linguistics professor anymore. He was carrying a warning from 50,000 years in the past, a message written in blood and stone by people who'd watched their entire civilization crumble. The Galactic Assembly Hall was packed when they arrived. Representatives from every major species were there, along with scientists, politicians, military leaders, and journalists. The room could hold 5,000 beings, and every seat was filled. Cameras floated through the air, broadcasting to billions across the galaxy. Tyler stood at the central podium, feeling incredibly small. Dr. Keseth stood beside him, offering silent support. He'd practiced this presentation dozens of times on the ship, but now that the moment was here, his mouth felt dry and his hands were shaking. He began by showing them the tablets, explaining how he'd translated them. Then he showed footage from the university on Kepler 442b, the buildings and the library, the ancient computer systems still functioning after millennia. He played the video recordings, letting the ancient humans speak for themselves. The assembly hall fell silent as they listened to the desperate warnings of a dying civilization. Then he presented the scientific data. The papers about exotic particle accumulation. The calculations showing how FTL travel was breaking down spacetime itself. The predictions that had come true, the cascade that had stranded thousands of ships and isolated hundreds of colonies. And finally, the most damning evidence, the comparison between ancient human FTL technology and current galactic FTL technology. They were identical. Every species in the galaxy was using the same fundamental principles, traveling the same routes, making the same mistakes. And the particle buildup was already happening. According to the calculations left by human scientists 50,000 years ago, Tyler said, his voice carrying across the silent hall, we have approximately 500 years before reaching critical threshold. After that, the cascade will begin again. FTL travel will fail across vast regions of space. Your civilizations will be cut off from each other, isolated, alone. And if history is any guide, most of you won't survive what comes next. The silence lasted for perhaps 10 seconds. Then the hall erupted. A representative from the Velshera Commercial Guild stood up, his voice amplified across the room. This is absurd. We've been using FTL travel for thousands of years without any problems. Why should we believe calculations made by primitive humans who couldn't even save their own civilization? Others joined in. A military commander from a species that controlled a vast empire declared the whole thing was human propaganda, an elaborate scheme to gain political power. A scientist from a prestigious research institute insisted that their technology was more advanced than what the ancient humans had, that they'd already solved these problems without even knowing about them. Tyler let them shout. He'd expected this. Dr. Keseth had warned him that denial would be the first reaction. People didn't want to believe their way of life was built on a foundation that was slowly crumbling. But not everyone was in denial. A young engineer from a species Tyler didn't recognize stood up, her voice cutting through the chaos. I've reviewed the calculations. They're sound. The exotic particle buildup is measurable. We can detect it right now along major shipping routes. I've been detecting anomalies in our drive systems for years, small efficiency losses that we attributed to normal wear and tear. But if these particles are accumulating, that would explain everything. More scientists spoke up, confirming what they'd found in their own research. Strange readings that didn't quite make sense. Unexplained energy losses. Areas of space where FTL drives performed slightly worse than they should. Individually, these were minor anomalies. But viewed through the lens of the ancient human warnings, they formed a pattern. The assembly descended into arguments. Some species called for an immediate halt to all FTL travel, proposing that everyone return to their home systems and isolate themselves to prevent further damage. Others insisted that would be worse than the disease, that cutting off trade and communication would destroy galactic civilization just as surely as the cascade would. A few voices, cold and calculating, suggested that if FTL travel was going to fail anyway, they should use the remaining time to secure resources and strategic positions. Tyler watched with growing horror as several military leaders began discussing the logistics of preemptive strikes and territorial expansion. Then there were those who directed their anger at Earth. A coalition of species proposed that humanity should be quarantined, prevented from accessing any predecessor technology or knowledge. They brought this curse into our galaxy, one ambassador declared. They built a civilization that destroyed itself, and now they've returned to doom us all. We should contain them before they cause more damage. Tyler felt his temper flare. We didn't cause this. My ancestors tried to warn their civilization, just like I'm trying to warn you now. They published papers, held conferences, begged their leaders to listen. And those leaders ignored them because change was expensive and inconvenient. You're doing the exact same thing right now. Dr. Keseth stepped forward, her forearms spread wide in a gesture that commanded attention. Fighting each other accomplishes nothing. Blaming the humans for warning us about a danger is worse than foolish, it's suicidal. The question before us isn't who's at fault. The question is what we do next. The hall quieted slightly. Dr. Keseth continued, her voice firm. I've spent 300 years studying the predecessors. I believed they were some advanced, enlightened civilization that we should aspire to emulate. I was wrong. They were people, flawed and mortal, just like us. They made mistakes. And they paid for those mistakes with everything they'd built. But they also left us something valuable, a warning, and the beginnings of a solution. Tyler pulled up another file on the display, one of the last scientific papers published before the cascade. The ancient humans knew they were in trouble, but they also knew what would fix it. They'd begun research into alternative FTL methods, specifically something they called quantum slipstream drives. The theoretical framework is all here in the archives. It's a different approach to faster-than-light travel, one that doesn't produce the same exotic particles. He showed them the calculations, the preliminary designs, the experimental results from early prototypes. The ancient humans had been close to a breakthrough when the cascade hit. They'd understood the principles, worked out most of the mathematics, even built small-scale test models. They just hadn't had time to implement it before their civilization collapsed. This isn't just a warning, Tyler said. It's a roadmap. They showed us what doesn't work and what might work instead. We have 500 years and the combined knowledge of every species in this galaxy. If we work together, we can finish what they started. Dr. Vrel stood up, his insectoid features somehow conveying determination. I propose an immediate galactic research initiative. We pool our resources, our best scientists, our most advanced facilities. We verify the threat, develop the new drive technology, and begin implementing it across all our fleets. 500 years sounds like a long time, but replacing every FTL-capable ship in the galaxy will take decades, maybe centuries. We need to start now. The arguments continued for hours, but slowly, a consensus began to form. Not everyone agreed. Some species withdrew from the assembly, declaring they would handle the situation on their own. Others remained skeptical, insisting on independent verification before committing resources. But enough voices came together to form a coalition, a joint effort that crossed species and political boundaries. That night, Tyler returned to the library at the Institute. The ancient tablets were still on display, but now they meant something different. They weren't mysterious artifacts from an unknowable past. They were letters from home, messages from ancestors to descendants, warnings carved in stone because the people who wrote them knew they wouldn't survive to deliver the warning in person. He found Dr. Keseth there, studying one of the tablets with new eyes. I've been reading this wrong for 300 years, she admitted. I was so focused on treating it like an alien artifact that I never considered it might be something simpler. A memorial. A gravestone. A message that says we were here, we mattered, please don't make our mistakes. Tyler pulled out his data pad and began writing. Not a scientific paper or an official report, but something more personal. He wrote in both English and Latin, bridging the 50,000-year gap between himself and the people who'd walked on Kepler 442b. To those who came before, message received. We understand what you tried to tell us. We see the warning you left carved in stone and preserved in crystal. We know what you lost and why you lost it. And we promise, on behalf of every species that now travels between the stars, we will do better. We'll finish the work you started. We'll develop the technology you dreamed of. We'll save the civilization you couldn't save. He paused, then added one final line. Humanity remembers now. And we won't let the galaxy forget. Dr. Keseth read over his shoulder. You think it will work? That we can actually change course in time? Tyler thought about the scientists who'd published warnings that went unheeded, the colonists who'd carved messages in stone with failing hands, the woman in the video recording who'd spoken of broken dreams and wasted opportunities. He thought about the 500 years ahead and the enormous task of convincing an entire galaxy to change the foundation of their civilization. I don't know, he admitted. But my ancestors didn't have a choice. They ran out of time. We still have time, and we have their research to build on. That has to count for something. The Galactic Research Initiative launched 3 months later, the largest collaborative scientific project in recorded history. Humans worked alongside dozens of species, combining humanity's understanding of the ancient warnings with the advanced technology and diverse perspectives of galactic civilization. The work would take generations. But for the first time in 50,000 years, humanity wasn't alone. And the ghosts of the predecessors, the ancient humans who'd left their warnings carved in stone, could finally rest knowing their message had been heard.